You could brute force your way through life by looking at every single thing you eat and trying to figure out the DIAS score for its protein. So, okay, I'm about to have a ribeye. That's going to be about a 96% DIAS. I'm going to have my, soybeans over here. That's about an 80% DIAS. I'm going to have my whey isolate. That's 100% DIAS. I'm going to have my shredded wheats. That's a 40% DIAS. That's a tough way to go through life because you can't just add up
and they're
the
not truly additive.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not truly additive. You can't really figure that
That's
out.
right.
And the average person doesn't even have that data. I mean, if you go into the USDA database with whatever 7,000 foods, there are 4,000 that actually have amino acid scores, and of those, there's probably less than 300 that have DIAS scores. And so you can't put it together. There's no way. And so we're trying to develop a system that allows people to get better than that. If you look on a label on a package and you see, again, a wheat cereal that says it has 4 grams of protein, well, again, that's a nitrogen analysis times 6.25 for all the problems I've said. And then if you look over in another column, it'll say daily values.
Yeah, exactly.
And there almost no label have daily values for protein because that would require a PD-Cas or DIAS score, and nobody has them. And so that 4 grams really would translate into less than 2, but nobody's being told that.
That's right. And by the way, just for folks who are hearing us use the term DIAS, that's digestible, indispensable amino acid score, correct?
The digestibility is where a lot of people have been focusing, but I have a big problem with the amino acid scores because they're incredibly low. They're way too low. And so they're established by the World Health Organization, by the FAO, which is really designed to prevent malnutrition in Africa, where we know from our Institute of Medicine that the essential amino acid scores are much higher than that, should be. You mentioned stable isotopes a little bit ago, or tracers. We know from stable isotope studies that all those FAO amino acid scores are too low. And so that's part of the equation that we're not telling people either.
What you're offering as an alternative to people living in spreadsheets to calculate how much actual indispensable amino acid they're getting is, hey, what if we make this easier and you focus on the actual content of 3 amino acids? So we're going to take a subset of essential amino acids. And if I recall, I remember leucine was clearly one of them. Lysine was one of them. Was methionine the other one?
Methionine is the other one, yeah.
So we're going to take methionine, leucine, lysine, and we just want you, Peter, to walk around and make sure you get enough of those with each meal. And if you do that, the rest will take care of itself. Is that effectively what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. If you look at DIAS scores right now, the amino acid scoring, I've already said is too low. But if you look at how they're scored, they're not scoring apples and apples. They're scoring apples and oranges. So if you look at the soy deficiency, all legumes like soy or pea are limiting or deficient in methionine. And you score that against whey, what you end up is the limiting amino acid in whey is considered histidine. And no one has ever shown histidine to actually be a limiting amino acid in an adult. It's a limiting amino acid in children and babies, but nobody. So now we're comparing apples and oranges. They're not fair. So if you compare methionine to methionine, it's not 20% higher, it's 250% better in soy, comparing soy and whey.
Yep.
So we need to compare apples and apples. We need to compare them across the 3 essential amino acids that are actually likely to be limiting, where histidine, phenylalanine, to my knowledge, no one has ever shown those to be limiting in an adult. So why do we consider them limiting?
So we know now pretty unambiguously leucine is an amazing trigger for mTOR. Of course, there's going to be a subset of people listening to this who are confused. But wait a minute, Peter, if rapamycin is good and rapamycin inhibits mTOR, how can leucine be good if leucine turns it on? And of course, they're forgetting the chronicity of the state. Sometimes you need mTOR off. Sometimes you want mTOR off. Sometimes you want it on. Sometimes you want it off. But when we're talking about eating, we want it on, right? We want to be able to turn mTOR on for muscle protein synthesis, right?
So let's circle back to our earlier comment about how often you eat.
Yeah.
So now we've got an issue of mTOR and whether it needs to cycle on and off. And not only does leucine turn it on, but so does insulin.
Yep.
And so probably the worst case scenario, and you can use a lot of animal studies to back this up, would be people who eat a lot of small carbohydrate meals that continuously activate mTOR. What we want to do is use specific meals with the right amount of insulin to activate muscle-centric mTOR. mTOR is in every tissue, and what you don't want to do is continuously activate it in liver or some other tissue. And so that's where the confusion gets into it, is people ignore the fact that insulin is just the biggest trigger in other tissues, where leucine's a very unique trigger in muscle.
Yep. So now let's go back to the practical application of this. So we know why leucine matters. Can you say a bit more about methionine and lysine and why raising them to the level of leucine becomes a great proxy for overall protein load?
So if you look at limiting amino acids actually in food, lysine is always limiting in grains, and that has been shown in animal science over the years. That's a major limitation in how you feed, what the minimum amount. So that one is probably limiting for protein synthesis. It's also in carnitine and some other things, but lysine is probably mostly for protein synthesis. Methionine is one of the least, so if we look at the amounts we need about 3.4 grams of lysine per day. We need probably a little less than 1 gram of methionine. So they're not in the same proportion either. But the methionine is what we call part of the 1-carbon pool. And so basically for the body to make and repair DNA, to make and repair RNA, to make taurine downstream, to make the non-essential amino acid cysteine, to make glutathione, the oxidant, methionine is the key to all of those pathways. And so methionine is one of the most limiting, and it's limiting in all legumes. So we think of soy and pea and a lot of, and lentils and things of that nature as higher quality protein. They are, but they're still limiting in methionine.
What are some of the natural sources of food that are high in methionine?
The classic one of, quote, sulfur amino acids is eggs.
Eggs, yeah.
Eggs are quite high in the sulfur amino acids, which are methionine and cysteine. Yeah. But all animal products are adequate in them, and basically all plant products are pretty low in them.
So Don, you grew up on a farm, right? So
Yes.
We look at animals like cows, which are quite muscular, eating basically just hay and grass. For them to be able to be as catabolic as they are and produce so much muscle, does that just speak to the incredible volume of that plant that they have to chew to make sure they're getting enough methionine, enough lysine, and enough leucine?
I think you meant anabolic, not catabolic.
Sorry, anabolic, yeah. In such an anabolic state, I mean, what volume of total protein in the form of grass and hay and things like that do they need to get a sufficient amount of those muscle-building amino acids?
That sort of wanders us into a sustainability argument, which I really love to wade into. But cattle, ruminant animals, are a very important part of the food chain because of their stomach, which is full of bacteria. One of the things to think about for essential amino acids is really the only place they come from in life is bacteria. Nothing else can make them. And so our primary source of them in nature is the bacteria on roots of plants. So the bacteria on the roots will take the nitrogen. Why do we fertilize our garden? Is nitrogen. The bacteria will take that inorganic nitrogen and form organic amines with it. And those organic amines then can be made into proteins in the plants. But as I said earlier, the problem with plants is that they don't have the same balance as we need. They have the plants to make roots and limbs and roots and flowers and things like that. The beauty of a ruminant is they can take that plant and they can digest it, and the bacteria then will rebalance all of the amino acids. They'll capture inorganic nitrogen, and they make the essential amino acids that mammals need, and they concentrate it for us. So basically, humans, one of the arguments is humans evolved by being able to use more concentrated protein. If we just ate plants, it's hard to get enough. But if the ruminant animal can actually digest all of that, form it into appropriate amino acids. So basically, for every 60 grams of protein an animal eat, they'll make 100 grams of essential amino acid, balanced protein.
Wait a minute.
So they're
say
basically
that again.
upside.
Say that again.
So for every 60 grams of plant-based proteins and nitrogen that they'll take in, they can upcycle that to 100 grams of amino acid balanced protein. So ruminants are called upcyclers. So whether it's in dairy or meats or also goats and sheep and deer, all of those ruminant animals upcycle. By eating grasses, they produce great quality protein. No other animal can do that.
And just to make sure I understand the mass balance of that, the bacteria are obviously the engine of that upcycle, but you can't make nitrogen out of nothing. So you're saying the other four...
But they're making protein out of nitrogen.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. So they're getting the nitrogen from the fertilizer that went into the grass. And
not quite. They're getting nitrogen that's inorganic in the plants, but it's not actually in protein forms.
Yep. Okay.
And so it's in the fibers and other kinds of things. So they're able to upcycle that. They're able to increase the value of non-amino acid nitrogen, plus they capture all of those other nitrogens.
So first of all, that's I had no idea that was happening. I had never heard of that phenomenon. So that's incredibly fascinating. Secondly, are they also disproportionately creating amino acids that weren't necessarily there in the plant? So in other words, if you use the example you gave earlier, which is, you eat 100 grams of cow protein, you're going to probably get quite an amount of methionine, lysine, and leucine. Is it true that amount of amino acid was not even present in the 60 grams of grass protein that they consumed?
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. So the bacteria, if you look at the flora in the cow, they have certain bacteria that will produce methionine or a lysine. So they can basically take an amine nitrogen, or they can take glycine, a non-essential amino acid, and they can make it into amino acids. One of the supplements that you can actually feed a cow is urea. So a human waste product type of thing. We excrete nitrogen waste as urea in the urine. You can actually feed urea, a nitrogen source, to a cow, and they can make it into methionine or leucine or lysine.
Unbelievable. So it's an interesting argument, because this gets now we're venturing from nutrition into religion, but right, because there's certainly a group of people who would argue that we should not be eating any animal protein whatsoever. We shouldn't eat we shouldn't eat meat, we shouldn't eat eggs, we shouldn't eat dairy, etc. A counter argument to that would be it's awfully difficult without these animals to get adequate amino acids, especially if you stop thinking of it in terms of an RDA and start thinking of it in terms of essential amino acids.
I try and stay away from the religious argument of it. That's a personal preference, as you say. I think of it as a biochemist, and there's just no question that ruminant animals play a very important role in our food system, and one we can't really replace. We can't just idle millions of acres of grassland and pretend that we can grow avocados on them or broccoli. Cattle basically spend a year of their life on basically nothing but grass. And that is an amazing, and and sheep sheep and goats the same, but those are amazing contributions to our food system.